Hello, this is 7.4 in geometry, special parallelograms. So each of the quadrilaterals that we'll talk about today are also parallelograms. So even though they have their own special properties, they also possess every single property that a parallelogram has as well. So the first type of parallelogram that we'll talk about is a rhombus. So a rhombus is a parallelogram with four congruent sides. And then to show a diagram of that, if it's a parallelogram, it's quadrilateral as well. If all the four sides are congruent, then I could show that using tick marks. It's a parallelogram, so I could also show, even though I'm not going to do that right now, that opposite sides are parallel. Opposite angles are congruent. Consecutive angles are supplementary. Diagonals bisect each other. Again, a rhombus is a parallelogram, so it possesses all the properties of a parallelogram as well. Okay, another special parallelogram is a rectangle. So a rectangle is a parallelogram with four right angles, or you could also say four congruent angles. And then if they're all congruent, the sum is 360 degrees. You could figure out the measure of each of the angles by dividing by 4, and they would each be 90 degrees or right angles. So there's an example of a rectangle. Again, opposite sides are parallel, opposite sides are congruent, etc., etc. Okay. A third special parallelogram is a square. So a square is a parallelogram that's both a rhombus and a rectangle. So it has all sides congruent and all angles are right angles. So I could draw a diagram and then showing that specifically with all the sides congruent and all the angles are right angles. We'll talk about a few corollaries that deal with the parallelograms. For example, corollary 7.2, again, a corollary is a statement that directly follows a theorem, or it could easily be proven by a theorem. So corollary 7.2 is the rhombus corollary. A quadrilateral is a rhombus if and only if, so it's written in biconditional form, if and only if it has four congruent sides. So here's my quadrilateral. We'll call it ABCD. It's a rhombus if it has four congruent sides. Or if a quadrilateral has four congruent sides, then it is a rhombus. Similar to the rhombus corollary, we also have the rectangle corollary. So a quadrilateral is a rectangle if and only if it has four right angles. Here's my quadrilateral. If it had four right angles, call this quadrilateral PQRS, then the quadrilateral is a rectangle. And then finally, for the corollaries, we have corollary 7.3, the square corollary. A quadrilateral is a square if and only if it is a rhombus and a rectangle. So all the sides of the quadrilateral, call it ABCD, have to be congruent, and then all the angles have to be right angles as well. Then the quadrilateral is a square. Notice each of the corollaries that we just went over, square corollary, rectangle corollary, and then the rhombus corollary, basically follow the definitions of each of those parallelograms. In the next video, we'll talk about certain properties of the special parallelograms.